Well, hello there, fellow geeks and geekettes, and welcome to another review video. This time about Dark Knight's Death Metal issue 5, which is the 5th issue of the main storyline of the latest crossover event by DC Comics, written by Scott Snyder and illustrated by Greg Capullo, which is more or less direct sequel to Dark Knight's Metal from a couple of years ago. Now, I have made reviews about the previous issues as well as almost all the tie-ins that are connected to this particular crossover event, and I have to say that Scott Snyder, I think, is getting exactly where I thought he would be going. But I will get to that later. The important thing is that he is doing everything he can to entertain the readers, and that is the most important thing when you are a writer, especially a comic book writer. The most important thing is to grasp the attention of the reader. As far as the comic books go, to have fun, to engage in a little bit of escapism is important, and that is what Scott Snyder is doing. I'm not going to go into the plot very much. I'm not going to spoil anything because it's just details. Of course, it's Scott Snyder. You have to pay attention. You've got to have a vast knowledge of the DC universe and the history of DC Comics. You have to think about things. You have to reread the issues and the previous issues very often for you to be able to understand everything fully and into depth. But you can do that for yourself. I don't have to explain what's going on and every single detail and all the crises and anti-crises energies and the Mobius chair and the Batman Who Laughs or the Darkest Night and Perpetua, and where they want to gather the anti-crisis energy so they can recreate the multiverse in their own image and create their own dark multiverse and yada yada da. It's all very fascinating, and it only shows that Scott Snyder is really a very clever man, very clever, educated man who can think into depth, and a very good writer, an extremely good writer. I believe he began as a prose writer, if I'm not wrong. So all these things are pointing to the fact that Scott Snyder is really a true talent. And the same can be said about Greg Capullo. I mean, he got big in the 1990s working on, well, Spawn, but before that, I think that he worked on the X-Men for a bit, or was it X-Force? For Marvel for a little bit. And then, of course, he got very famous working on Spawn, and obviously, when the New 52 came, he just became the Batman artist of the 21st century, right? But what is important is that, well, two things. Stories are always the same. You've got several types of stories, and they are archetypal stories. And each and every hero or superhero story just revolves in a certain way, right? You've got certain acts, you've got certain parts of the story, you've got certain tropes, and something starts somewhere, it gets in the middle, and it ends somewhere. And it's almost always the same, right? And as far as the huge events or crises events by either DC or Marvel Comics, it always gets, it's always revolving around the same thing. There's one villain, one main or two major villains, and all the heroes have to get together. If it's a publisher-wide crossover event like Metal or Death Metal, or such as was the Crisis on Infinite Earths or Final Crisis or Blackest Night. So all the heroes from this universe get together to defeat that particular villain, right? And it seems that everything's hopeless, but in the end, they win and they defeat the villain, right? And it then just depends on the wishes and the plans of the publisher. If they're going to retcon something or reboot something or change something or not, such as happened many times in the history of DC Comics. They just rebooted things. They just changed things in the continuum, in the continuity in the universe. And then they came back. So it just, it has been happening over and over again. So this isn't really anything new. What is important is how you get there. You can always tell certain amount of types of stories, but you can always tell the story differently, add different things into the story that will grasp the readers in sometimes unexpected ways. And what I appreciate about Dark Knight's Death Metal especially, so thank you Scott Snyder for that, is that he was able to surprise me by a couple of things, and that is mainly by the choice of the characters that he was using. Chiefly one character, and that is my very favorite character of all time, and that's obviously Lobo. He has been using Lobo in Dark Knight's Death Metal quite a lot, and especially in this one. So a teensy tiny spoiler, my favorite part of this particular issue, Dark Knight's Death Metal issue 5, was that he used Lobo's ability to replicate himself, to basically create multiple Lobos, as it was shown in one of the, was it Ellen Grant and Keith Giffen's Lobo from the 1990s? That was one of the greatest stories about Lobo ever written, and it was extremely entertaining and funny in the 90s. So I'm glad that so much depends on Lobo, and that Lobo is so important for this story. Obviously, the heroes are going to defeat the Darkest Knight and Perpetua, obviously, of course, because it's a superhero story. But what I consider important is how they get there. So that's the usage mainly for me of Lobo, and then there's the other thing which isn't so bright, but it is inevitable. And it is more than obvious and apparent that this event is leading into, yet again, huge changes in DC continuity, DC universe. It is very probable and very likely that they will get rid of or put aside the main characters, the main superheroes, those iconic archetypal DC superheroes that they have been relying on for a long time. And I'm not now talking about specifically like the titles, like Batman or Superman. Of course, in my opinion, these are not titles. Batman is not a title. Superman is not a title, as well as in Marvel Comics. Iron Man is not a title. Not everybody can be Iron Man. Not everybody can be Batman. Not everybody can be Flash. Not everybody can be Spider-Man. So that's why I consider the Spider-Verse to be a bunch of nonsense. Like, there's Peter Parker. All right, you've got alternative realities. All right, so have your Miles Morales. Yeah, alternative realities, I can take that, of course. I do believe that there's a possibility there's like an infinite number of alternative realities, in which case, all right, yeah. But to change the main continuity in the main reality in the way that we get rid of somebody that, has been making a lot of money for the company for a long time, is just unwise. But as far as DC Comics goes, it's beyond salvation, right? So we can't cry about that, we can't argue about that, we can't be sad or angry about that. It is just an inevitable thing, right? That unfortunately, the DC Comics publisher will be no more very soon. And I think that DC Comics' Dark Knight's Death Metal is the last huge story by DC Comics for me. And if it is so, I'm glad, because it is awesome. And I do appreciate it. And I only thank Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, plus all the writers and artists that are involved in it as far as the tie-in issues go, for making me love comics, even if they are contemporary comics. I, of course, will forever love the good old comics, but there's no question about that. So I only want to say that thanks to these people, I do enjoy reading modern comic books, contemporary comics. So thank you for that. And for those of you who are sad about DC Comics being no more very soon, don't be sad. Everything has to end, and we will forever have the good old comics to read. My favorite literature is one of the oldest kinds of literature, the Anglo-Saxon literature, the Old English, the Old Germanic literature. Now, this kind of literature isn't being written anymore, but it's still being published. So that's the best thing we can hope for, that the good old comic books will still be published and republished, and that we'll be able to read them and reread them all over and over again. So yeah, that's my take on it. What did you think about the Dark Knight's Death Metal issue 5, my friends? Let me know in the comments down below if you share my opinion or if your opinion differ in any way. And that will be all. Thank you. Subscribe to this unimportant channel if you haven't done so already. Dislike this video if you don't like it, or like this video if you like it. That'll be really all. See you soon. Keep reading good stuff, and bye.